There have been many attempts to challenge Mercedes and BMW. Cadillac tried, Alfa Romeo tried, Opel tried more than once, but the result was almost always the same. No one could truly get close to the German duo. But today, it is no longer a duo. It is a trio. Audi now stands alongside Mercedes and BMW on equal terms. And much of that can be traced back to one specific model, the Audi 100C3. This is the story of its success and how Audi took its place among the leaders. After the war, the once largest automotive group, Auto Union, was in a very poor state. Its main factory in Zwickau had been destroyed, and the remaining equipment was dismantled and taken to the Soviet Union as reparations. Nevertheless, with the support of the Bavarian government, the former management of Auto Union managed to set up production of spare parts and DKW cars in West Germany. The lineup was based on light vans and small compact cars with two-stroke engines, producing 20 to 40 horsepower. Simple, reliable, and relatively inexpensive vehicles helped the company get back on its feet and gradually restore production in Ingolstadt and Dusseldorf. Soon, Daimler-Benz became interested in Auto Union, and in 1958, the company came under its control. However, not for long. In 1966, it became part of Volkswagen. Volkswagen inherited several promising models, but their main drawback was outdated two-stroke engines. For Heinrich Nordhoff, however, this was not a major concern. At that time, Volkswagen followed a very conservative strategy. The company was not focused on new developments and relied on existing models, especially the Beetle, which, despite its pre-war design, continued to gain popularity. In this context, Auto Union was seen more as a production base that could be used to expand the output of Volkswagen's existing models. However, the engineers of Auto Union, led by Ludwig Krauss, strongly disagreed with this approach, especially considering the promising developments that were already in progress but effectively being shut down. In 1967, Krauss took the initiative and began working on a new large sedan, a project that would later become the first-generation Audi 100. The idea was to position it between the mass-market Volkswagen and the more prestigious Mercedes. When the prototype was presented to Nordhoff, his reaction was reserved. However, he did not stop the project and allowed it to go into production, effectively under Krauss's personal responsibility. The Audi 100 C1 debuted in November 1968 and immediately attracted attention. It was a fairly large front-wheel drive sedan with a proper four-stroke water-cooled engine, a significant step forward compared to previous models. The 1.8-liter engine produced 80 horsepower and was paired with a 4-speed manual transmission. Later, an automatic transmission was introduced for the first time on an Audi. The car was built on a modern chassis with independent front suspension and a rear torsion beam. It also featured front disc brakes and rack and pinion steering. Compared to its predecessors with DKW badges, the Audi 100 looked much more modern and technologically advanced. It was not yet a premium car. It was simply a well-built and thoughtfully designed vehicle that still had to catch up to Mercedes. Many manufacturers, in addition to their base sedans, tried to add two-door coupes to their lineup. Cars designed less for practicality and more for personal comfort and status. Audi followed the same path. First, a two-door version of the sedan appeared, and in 1970 a proper coupe was introduced, the Audi 100 Coupe S, designed in the then-popular American fastback style. The car was noticeably different from the standard Audi 100, a different front end with twin round headlights, a shorter wheelbase, a more powerful 1.9-liter engine producing 115 horsepower, ventilated front brakes, and a more upscale interior with wood trim and leather seats. Acceleration to 100 kilometers per hour took about 11 seconds, and the top speed reached 185 kilometers per hour, a solid result for its time. The Audi 100 turned out to be a commercial success. Well-built, elegant, and, as it later proved, quite reliable, the car appealed to buyers. Already in the first year, 68,000 units were sold, and by 1970, sales exceeded 100,000. In total, more than 827,000 units of the first generation were produced. The project, initially seen within Volkswagen more as an experiment, eventually proved that Audi was not just an assembly platform, but a brand with its own engineering potential. After that, the engineers were given more freedom, which led to the second generation, the Audi 100 C2. Introduced in 1976, the new Audi 100 grew significantly in size and changed in appearance. The soft, rounded shapes were replaced by more strict and straight lines, while the car still remained recognizable. Important changes also took place under the hood. Instead of the usual layouts, a 5-cylinder engine appeared, quite unusual at the time, which initially produced 100 horsepower and was later increased to 136. The manufacturer emphasized that it offered the power of a 6-cylinder engine with the efficiency of a 4-cylinder. Two-door versions were still available in this generation, but demand for them was low, and they were quickly discontinued. The coupe also disappeared, but a hatchback version appeared, which Audi called Avant. At the same time, the company began actively entering the North American market. There, the model was sold as the Audi 5000 and saw solid demand, largely due to its more upscale equipment. Diesel and turbodiesel versions were added to the lineup, and in 1980, a more powerful model, the Audi 200, was introduced. By this point, the second-generation Audi 100 had come very close to the class leaders from Stuttgart and Bavaria, and had started to take some of their customers. In terms of prestige, Audi was still behind, but it offered a more technological and rational alternative for the same money. Front-wheel drive, still unusual for this segment, provided better handling and improved fuel efficiency, especially important during the fuel crisis. This was the key shift. The second-generation Audi 100 did not become better than Mercedes, but it became better suited to a new type of buyer that was just beginning to emerge. By the end of the 1970s, the Audi 100 was already starting to feel outdated. Angular shapes, clearly separated body sections, sharp transitions, and windows mounted in rubber seals all looked normal by the standards of the 1970s. But by the early 1980s, they no longer matched the class Audi was aiming for. Many manufacturers were working on their own vision of the car of the future. The late 1970s were heavily focused on the idea of cars for the year 2000, with designers and engineers trying to look ahead and understand what cars would be like in a couple of decades. They quickly came to the same conclusion. Cars needed to become more aerodynamic. Careful aerodynamic development could improve not just the appearance, but also key characteristics such as speed, stability, and fuel efficiency. The Audi Auto 2000 prototype, along with similar concepts from Volkswagen and Mercedes, was developed as part of a government program aimed at reducing fuel consumption. The goal was ambitious. A midsize car with a 1.6-liter engine was expected to achieve around 7 liters per 100 kilometers, about 20% lower than the typical figures at the time. While working on the new generation of the Audi 100, engineers kept only the basic concept, a longitudinal engine layout and front-wheel drive. At the same time, the overall dimensions and wheelbase were increased to provide more interior space. The third-generation Audi 100 was introduced in 1982, and in 1983, it received the European Car of the Year award, beating the Ford Sierra by 24 points. What made the Audi 100 C3 win over automotive journalists? First of all, its design and aerodynamics. This model was defined by an almost complete absence of sharp edges and clear transitions. Horizontal surfaces flowed smoothly into vertical ones, and details like door handles, mirrors, and moldings were carefully smoothed out. Everything was focused on reducing air resistance. In many ways, the Audi 100 of this generation was ahead of its time. While competitors were still producing cars with pronounced arches and exposed elements, the new Audi sedan looked much cleaner and more unified. And it was not just about appearance. The drag coefficient was only 0.30, an outstanding result for the early 1980s. Another important feature was the so-called flush windows, glass mounted flush with the body. Instead of traditional rubber seals, the windows were bonded in place, which further reduced drag and made the overall shape more cohesive. At the same time, the design was interesting not only because of its smooth surfaces. Hidden window frames and the stretched silhouette made the car look light and dynamic, despite its relatively large size. Two-door versions were no longer offered, but the Avant remained in the lineup. And in this generation, it finally became a proper wagon rather than a hatchback. The engine lineup of the Audi 100 C3 was broad, ranging from basic carbureted versions to more powerful five-cylinder engines. It was in this generation that fuel injection systems began to actively replace carburetors. Most of the gasoline five-cylinder versions produced over 100 horsepower. So in terms of performance, the Audi 100 was no longer a compromise. Diesel versions were also available, and in 1990, a 2.5 TDI engine with direct injection was introduced, producing 120 horsepower and around 200 newton meters of torque. Importantly, this diesel no longer felt tractor-like. In terms of noise and vibration, it was much closer to gasoline engines. Starting in 1985, the Audi 100 received a fully galvanized body. The manufacturer offered a 10-year warranty against corrosion, but in practice, these cars lasted much longer if they were not involved in major repairs. But the most important advantage appeared even earlier. In 1984, the all-wheel drive quattro version was introduced. Audi was the first to make all-wheel drive a feature of a regular passenger car, not for off-road use, but for improving handling and stability on regular roads. To demonstrate this, the company made a striking move. Rally driver Harold Demuth drove a production Audi 100 CS Quattro up a 37.5-degree ski jump in Finland. Yes, it was a publicity stunt, but it worked, both on customers and on competitors. In this generation, the Audi 100 finally came close to Mercedes and BMW, to the point where it was seen as a real alternative rather than a compromise. It offered a comparable level of comfort and quality for less money, and more importantly, the image of Audi as a lower-class car was finally starting to disappear. This raises a logical question. Why did Audi continue to develop the 200 lineup? The Audi 200 was originally created as an attempt to reach more prestigious competitors, a role similar to what the Opel Senator played. But once the Audi 100 itself had moved into that space, the need for a separate, top-tier version became far less clear. In practice, the Audi 200 remained what it had been from the start, a more expensive and better-equipped version of the standard Audi 100, a legacy of the time when the base model could not yet directly compete with sedans from Stuttgart and Munich. And the numbers make this clear. Even though the 200 stayed in production for as long as the Audi 100, their sales volumes differed by roughly a factor of 10. By the end of the 1980s, Audi engineers were already actively working on a new generation, while the current version received a facelift in 1988. The Audi 100 C3 got new bumpers and updated exterior details, including door handles, which are the easiest way to tell pre-facelift cars from later ones. The interior changes were even more noticeable. A new dashboard was introduced along with updated door panels, and thanks to this, even several years after its launch, the car still looked up to date. This facelift was more of an interim step. The Audi 100 was expected to hold its position until the arrival of a completely new generation. In 1991, the Audi 100 C4 was introduced, becoming the last 100 in the company's history. Shortly after, the model line was renamed Audi A6. Despite the updated exterior, the C4 was still largely based on the previous model. This can be seen in the overall silhouette and basic architecture, although the car was significantly reworked inside, especially in terms of comfort and safety. The body became more rigid, and in terms of passive safety, Audi relied on the Procon 10 system. Unlike airbags, which later became standard, it worked entirely mechanically. Cables connected the engine to the steering column and seatbelts, so in a frontal impact, as the engine moved backward, the steering wheel was pulled away from the driver and the belts were automatically tightened. As before, quattro all-wheel drive was available, and the engine lineup included both naturally aspirated engines and more powerful versions, up to a V8. However, as before, most buyers chose the simpler and more reliable options. And yet, it was the Audi 100 C3 that became the model that brought Audi into the segment where it remains to this day. It was with this car that buyers became accustomed to turbocharging and all-wheel drive, not in sports cars or off-road vehicles, but in a regular business-class sedan. And in essence, the Audi 100 C3 can be considered the most important model in the company's history.